She was just a scholarship student trying to survive in a world of privilege and power, until one cruel bully crossed the line. Little did he know, her father was the most lethal Green Beret sniper alive, and he was coming home. New York City pulsed with an energy that never seemed to wane, the hum of life merging with the sounds of honking taxis and distant construction. In the middle of this urban symphony, a girl stood on the steps of St. Augustine Academy, clutching the worn leather strap of her backpack so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Maya Johnson, 15 years old, was about to take her first step into a world she had only dreamed of, a world where money and privilege dominated, where people like her weren't supposed to belong. Maya took a deep breath, feeling her chest tighten with anticipation and dread. The grandeur of the academy loomed above her, old brick walls wrapped in ivy, arching windows reflecting the pale morning light. Her uniform, neatly pressed and painfully new, made her feel conspicuous. She could almost feel the invisible eyes judging her, labeling her as an outsider before she even crossed the threshold. For as long as she could remember, Maya had been taught to fight for what she wanted. Growing up in the Bronx, life wasn't handed to anyone. You earned it, inch by inch, through hard work and grit. She had been relentless in her pursuit of academic excellence, sacrificing sleep, weekends, and a social life to become the top student at her public school. When the letter of acceptance arrived, stamped with the golden crest of St. Augustine, it felt like she had won a war. But as she stood at the gates of the prestigious academy, a sinking realization dawned on her. This wasn't just another academic challenge. It was an entirely different battlefield. A group of students walked past her, their laughter echoing off the stone walls. They didn't notice her, not yet. But Maya could tell from their designer clothes, shiny leather shoes, and careless ease that they belonged here. She didn't. Swallowing the knot in her throat, she pushed open the heavy wooden doors and stepped inside. The hallway stretched in both directions, filled with the sound of footsteps and animated conversations. Her senses were overwhelmed. Gleaming trophies in display cases, murals depicting historical events, and the faint scent of polished wood and expensive cologne. As she navigated through the maze of corridors, Maya couldn't help but notice the way students glanced at her. Curious, intrigued, some outright dismissive. Her first class was AP Literature. As the bell rang, Mrs. Henderson, a tall, poised woman with a sharp gaze, addressed the room. Today, we're exploring resilience in classic American literature, she announced. Maya sat at the back, hoping to go unnoticed, but when Mrs. Henderson asked for interpretations of a passage from Beloved, Maya couldn't resist raising her hand. The novel doesn't just portray personal trauma, Maya said, her voice more confident than she felt. It's about generational suffering, the way pain is inherited, and sometimes never properly mourned. Mrs. Henderson seemed impressed, but from the corner of the room, a boy snorted. Maya didn't need to look to know who it was. Zachary Coleman. The name was whispered everywhere she went. The mayor's son. The golden boy of St. Augustine. His gaze was piercing, blue eyes narrowed with barely concealed disdain. Deep thoughts from the charity case, he muttered. His friends, equally privileged and equally smug, chuckled softly. Mrs. Henderson either didn't hear or pretended not to. Maya felt a flash of anger but bit her tongue. During lunch, Maya sat alone at a small table near the window, unwrapping a sandwich her mom had packed. Across the courtyard, Zachary held court, his friends hanging on his every word. He seemed larger than life, confident, loud, untouchable. A flash of movement caught her eye as he pushed a younger student, sending his tray sprawling across the grass. The kid mumbled an apology and Zachary just laughed. Maya forced herself to eat, but her stomach churned. She knew bullies, had dealt with them all her life. But Zachary was different. He wasn't just a bully. He was protected, insulated by his father's power and his family's wealth. As the days passed, Zachary's attention turned increasingly toward her. At first, it was snide comments, affirmative action at work, or maybe your scholarship should cover etiquette lessons. Maya didn't respond, determined not to give him the satisfaction. But his words cut deep, making her question whether she really belonged here. One afternoon, she found her locker covered in graffiti, ugly words scrawled in permanent marker. Her hands shook as she tried to scrub it off, tears welling up despite her best efforts to stay strong. No one stopped to help. That evening, at home, Maya kept quiet about it. Rebecca noticed her daughter's silence but didn't push. It wasn't until Maya broke down, admitting she didn't think she could make it here, that Rebecca sat beside her, holding her hand. "You fought hard to be where you are, Maya," she whispered. "Don't let anyone tell you that you don't deserve it." Maya nodded, but doubts lingered. She hadn't told her mother everything, like the note shoved into her locker earlier that day. "Go back where you came from." Unbeknownst to Maya, Zachary's campaign against her was just beginning, and while she struggled to keep her head above water, the whispers about her spread like wildfire. What Maya didn't know was that far from the city, in a place where danger was a constant companion, someone else was listening. A man who had been absent from her life for years, presumed dead. A man who had once been the most lethal sniper the Green Berets had ever known. As the rumors reached the ears of people who shouldn't have heard them, one name resurfaced: Anthony Johnson. And when Anthony found out what was happening to his daughter, his instincts flared to life. His little girl was in trouble, and nothing in the world could stop him from coming home. Days at St. Augustine Academy began to blur together for Maya. Each morning, she steeled herself before stepping through the grand iron gates, hoping today would be better than the last. But the hopeful thought faded as quickly as it appeared. The whispers followed her through the halls, as did the sidelong glances and muffled snickers. Even the teachers, who once seemed welcoming, now seemed hesitant to call on her, as if associating with her could somehow taint their reputations. Maya couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She had grown used to the curious stares when she first arrived, but now there was something sinister in the way certain students seemed to track her every move. Zachary's influence was suffocating, spreading like a toxic cloud through every corner of the school. It was as if he had declared her his personal project, determined to make her life a living nightmare. One afternoon, Maya walked into the gym locker room to find her locker door slightly ajar. Panic flared as she opened it to find her clothes drenched in a foul-smelling liquid. Someone had dumped a concoction of cleaning chemicals, and the stench made her eyes water. As she stared at the mess, laughter echoed from the doorway. She didn't have to turn around to know who it was. Zachary and his cronies stood there, grinning. "Maybe your kind doesn't understand basic hygiene," Zachary taunted. His friends snickered in agreement. Maya bit down on her lip, refusing to cry in front of them. She didn't know what hurt more, the cruelty itself or the realization that no one else in the room seemed to care. One of the girls even wrinkled her nose in disgust, as if blaming Maya for the smell. Gathering her ruined clothes, Maya made her way to the main office, determined to report the incident. Vice Principal Daniels barely looked up from his paperwork. "You sure it wasn't an accident?" he asked, his tone dismissive. "No, sir," Maya replied, keeping her voice steady despite the sting of humiliation. "They've been harassing me for weeks. Zachary and his friends," Daniels sighed. "Maya, you need to understand that fitting in can be challenging. Maybe you're just not blending well with the culture here. Boys will be boys, you know." The casual way he dismissed her pain made Maya's stomach twist. "So, you're saying it's my fault?" "No one's saying that. Just try to be less sensitive. Not everything is an attack." Maya left the office feeling colder than when she had walked in. It wasn't just the students, it was the entire system that seemed rigged against her. She had never felt so small. Back in the classroom, Zachary flashed her a wicked smile, and Maya knew that he had heard about her futile attempt to report him. He wasn't just bullying her, he was proving a point. No one could touch him. The next few days only grew worse. Someone slipped a crumpled note into her locker that read, "Go back to your ghetto." In biology class, Zachary accidentally knocked over her experiment, spilling acid across her lab notes. Mrs. Field scolded Maya for not being more careful, oblivious to Zachary's smug grin from across the room. The most humiliating moment came when Maya found a fake Instagram account made in her name. The profile was filled with edited pictures of her face pasted onto degrading images. The bio read, "Cheats to get into school, cheats to stay here." Comments poured in, mocking her intelligence and her background. Maya tried to report the account, but it kept popping up under different names. Her grades started to slip. Concentrating on assignments became nearly impossible when every hallway felt like walking through enemy territory. Sleep became elusive, haunted by nightmares of being chased, cornered, and helpless. Rebecca noticed her daughter's exhaustion and asked if everything was okay. Maya forced a smile, promising it was just the stress of the new school. But one evening, Maya couldn't hold it in any longer. As they sat in the small, cozy living room of their apartment, Maya finally broke down. Tears streamed down her face as she recounted everything: the locker incident, the ruined clothes, the fake profile, the constant threats. Rebecca listened, her expression hardening. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "I thought I could handle it," Maya whispered. "I didn't want you to worry." Rebecca pulled her daughter into a tight embrace. "You don't have to go through this alone, Maya. We'll figure it out." That night, as Maya finally fell into a fitful sleep, Rebecca stayed up, researching bullying laws, school policies, anything that might help. She knew this was beyond typical high school drama. This was targeted harassment. She was determined to protect her daughter. The following morning, Rebecca visited the school, demanding a meeting with Vice Principal Daniels. When she laid out the incidents, Daniels shifted uncomfortably. "These are serious accusations," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. "Zachary Coleman is the mayor's son. We have to be careful about making unsubstantiated claims." Rebecca's eyes flashed with anger. "My daughter is being terrorized, and you're worried about politics?" Daniels gave a tight smile. "We'll look into it." But days passed, and nothing changed. Zachary seemed emboldened, even more ruthless. Maya found herself retreating into a shell, avoiding eye contact and keeping her head down. The breaking point came when Maya returned from gym class to find the word slut spray painted across her locker. This time, it wasn't just Zachary and his friends who laughed. It was nearly the entire hallway. Maya felt her vision blur as she stumbled to the restroom, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She locked herself in a stall, trying to steady her trembling hands. Sitting on the cold tile floor, she pulled out her phone and scrolled through the hateful messages flooding her social media. Her resolve crumbled, and she texted Rebecca, "I can't do this anymore. I want to go back to my old school." That evening, Rebecca sat down with Maya, her heart aching for her daughter's pain. She knew this was beyond what they could handle alone. When Maya whispered through tears, "I wish Dad was here," it broke something in Rebecca. She hadn't heard Maya mention Anthony in years. Rebecca knew it was time to make a call she had been avoiding for far too long. Digging through old boxes, she found a small, secure phone hidden in a drawer. With trembling hands, she dialed the number. After a few rings, a voice answered, low, calm, and unmistakably familiar. "Rebecca?" Her voice cracked. "Anthony, it's time. Your daughter needs you." Silence stretched across the line before he responded, his tone turning lethal. "I'm on my way." For the first time in weeks, Maya slept peacefully, unaware that the most dangerous man she'd never truly known was coming home to protect her. The first rays of dawn filtered through the thin curtains of the small apartment, casting a soft glow over the faded photographs lining the walls. Maya sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cup of cooling tea. Sleep had been elusive, replaced by a restless anxiety that clung to her like a second skin. Rebecca moved quietly around the kitchen, her face drawn with worry. Neither had spoken much since the phone call the night before. Rebecca had tried to explain that morning, but how could she put it into words? How could she tell her daughter that the man they both thought dead was not only alive but on his way back to their lives? Maya had always known her father as a ghost, a figure from stories and fragments of memories, a brave soldier who had vanished, leaving behind nothing but a folded flag and an aching emptiness. The idea of him walking back through that door felt like a dream or a nightmare. When the knock finally came, it wasn't loud or insistent, just a firm, controlled sound, three measured taps against the wood. Rebecca's breath hitched. She glanced at Maya, who looked back with questioning eyes. Gathering her resolve, Rebecca moved to the door and unlocked it. There he stood, Anthony Johnson. Time had etched lines into his face, his dark skin weathered from years of harsh conditions. His frame was still imposing, muscles coiled under the faded jacket he wore. His eyes, sharp and piercing, softened the moment they landed on Maya. He didn't move at first, just stood there, as if waiting for permission to enter this fragile space he had abandoned so long ago. Maya couldn't speak. Her mind struggled to reconcile the image of the man before her with the stories she'd crafted in her head. The hero, the warrior, the father she had mourned. Anthony took a cautious step forward, then stopped. His voice was rough, as if unused to gentleness. "You've grown," he said, a hint of pride breaking through. "Last time I saw you, you could barely reach my hip." A single tear escaped Maya's eye before she knew it was coming. The raw vulnerability in her father's face made something inside her crack. Before she could think, she was in his arms, holding him like he was both real and a fading ghost. Anthony wrapped his arms around her carefully, as if afraid she might break. He didn't say anything, just held her, grounding himself in the reality of his daughter's touch. Rebecca wiped at her own eyes, forcing herself to hold on to the anger that had simmered for years. When Maya finally pulled back, Anthony looked over at Rebecca, his expression shifting to something more somber. "I'm sorry," he began, but Rebecca cut him off. "Not now," she whispered, glancing at Maya. "We'll talk later." Anthony nodded, understanding that some wounds couldn't be addressed in front of their daughter. He took a seat at the table and Maya followed, sitting across from him. Rebecca joined them, and for a while they just sat in silence, the weight of unspoken words pressing down on them. Anthony finally broke the quiet. "Rebecca told me what's been happening, about the school, the bullying." His jaw clenched, a flicker of fury flashing in his eyes. "I'm here now. It's going to stop." Maya looked down, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. "You don't know what it's like there. Zachary. He's untouchable." Anthony leaned forward, his voice steady. "No one is untouchable, Maya. Not when they hurt my family." There was a fierce protectiveness in his tone, and despite herself, Maya felt a spark of hope. Rebecca reached for Anthony's hand, squeezing it lightly, as if to remind him to keep his own rage in check. "What are you planning to do?" Rebecca asked, her tone wary. Anthony's eyes darkened. "First, I need to understand exactly what we're dealing with. Then, I'll make sure they know Maya isn't alone." For the next few hours, Maya recounted every detail. The threats, the vandalism, the fake social media accounts. Anthony listened without interrupting, his gaze never wavering. He asked pointed questions, names, times, places. Rebecca filled in the gaps where Maya hesitated, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. After Maya finished, Anthony sat back, processing. His mind was already forming a strategy, cataloging weaknesses and opportunities. He knew how to hunt dangerous men, track their movements, and dismantle their power. These were just boys, but their father's influence made them feel invincible. Anthony knew the type. He had faced men like the mayor before, men who thought their wealth and connections made them safe. That night, after Maya had gone to bed, Rebecca and Anthony sat at the kitchen table once more, the silence between them heavier than before. "You should have told me," Rebecca whispered, pain evident in her voice. Anthony lowered his head. "I thought I was keeping you safe. After the mission went south, they were looking for me. I couldn't risk you being caught in the crossfire." Rebecca wiped away a tear. "And you think Maya growing up without a father was safer?" His eyes glistened with regret. "No, I was wrong. I should have found another way." Rebecca's anger softened. She could see the weight he carried, the guilt, the sacrifices. But it didn't erase the years of loneliness. Still, the way he looked at Maya, like she was the only good thing in his life, made Rebecca's heart ache. "Promise me," she said, voice firm. "No more secrets. If you're staying, you stay. You don't run." Anthony nodded, his resolve hardening. "I'm not running, not anymore." The next morning, Anthony prepared to visit the school. He didn't bother with pleasantries or polite introductions. His presence alone was enough to make the staff uneasy. As he walked through the halls, students moved aside, sensing his authority. When he reached Vice Principal Daniel's office, he knocked once and then entered without waiting for an invitation. Daniels looked up, startled. "Can I help you?" Anthony didn't sit. "I'm Anthony Johnson, Maya's father." Daniels swallowed nervously. Yes, I wasn't aware." Anthony cut him off. "My daughter has been harassed, threatened, and humiliated in your school. You've done nothing to protect her." Daniels tried to bluster. "We take all reports seriously, but—" "Save it," Anthony snapped. "You didn't take anything seriously because the boy responsible is the mayor's son. That ends now. I'm giving you a chance to do the right thing. Launch an investigation. Interview witnesses. Make it clear that your students deserve safety, regardless of their background." Daniel stammered. "Mr. Coleman is untouchable." Anthony's voice dropped to a deadly whisper. "Not anymore." Daniels knew better than to argue. There was something about Anthony that made him feel exposed, as if the man could see every secret he tried to hide. Daniels nodded, promising to start looking into the matter immediately. As Anthony left the office, he spotted Zachary in the hallway, surrounded by his usual group. The boy looked at him with defiance, but there was fear in his eyes. Anthony didn't break his gaze, making sure Zachary knew. His time of unchecked power was over. Back at home, Maya couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. For the first time, someone was standing up for her. And not just anyone, her father. The legend she had only heard about was now real, and he wasn't going to let anyone hurt her anymore. Anthony Johnson had been many things, a soldier, a protector, a ghost to his enemies. But in that moment, standing in the middle of his daughter's living room, he was just a father, burdened with the knowledge that his absence had allowed Maya to be hurt. He couldn't go back in time and change his choices, but he could make sure that from this point on, no one would dare lay a hand on his daughter. As dusk settled over the city, Anthony sat at the worn kitchen table, his eyes focused on the small pile of evidence Maya had collected over the past few weeks. Each printed message, photo, and recording was a thread in a tangled web of harassment. Anthony's military mind cataloged every detail, processing it like a mission dossier. He knew that to dismantle this system, he needed more than just rage. He needed proof, strategy, and allies. Rebecca placed a cup of coffee in front of him and sat across the table, her eyes scanning his face. He looked older, more weary than the man she remembered, but his determination was unmistakable. "How bad is it?" Rebecca asked, her voice low. Anthony didn't sugarcoat it. "Bad. This isn't just bullying, it's targeted harassment. Zachary's got everyone under his thumb, and the school administration is too scared to challenge him. It's like the entire place is built to protect him. Rebecca swallowed hard. He's just a kid, Anthony. Anthony's eyes flashed. He's a kid with power, and no one's teaching him consequences. That makes him dangerous. That night, while Maya slept, Anthony began to piece together his plan. He knew that confronting Zachary directly would only play into the boy's hands. Anthony needed to show the town, the school board, and the community that the system itself was corrupted. To do that, he needed hard evidence. His first step was surveillance. Using skills honed over years in combat zones, Anthony planted small recording devices around strategic locations at the school, Vice Principal Daniel's office, the main hallway where most of the bullying incidents occurred, and even near the gym where Zachary and his friends often gathered. The devices were discreet, hidden within light fixtures, or tucked behind bulletin boards. He didn't stop there. Using an old contact from his military days, Anthony secured access to a digital monitoring system. A simple, harmless-looking app on his phone allowed him to tap into public security cameras near the school and keep an eye on Maya's walk home. He wouldn't take any chances. Zachary had proven he wasn't above ambushing her on her own turf. The next day, while Maya went to school with a cautious sense of hope, knowing her father was watching over her, Anthony paid a visit to an old friend. Officer Daniel Green had served with Anthony in the Army before becoming a police officer. Though they hadn't spoken in years, the bond forged through shared danger was still strong. They met at a small diner on the outskirts of town, where no one would pay them much attention. Daniel was wary at first, unsure why Anthony had suddenly resurfaced after all these years. But as Anthony laid out the situation, showing him the evidence of Maya's harassment, Daniel's expression hardened. "I've heard whispers," Daniel admitted, "but no one's willing to go against the mayor. Coleman's practically untouchable around here." Anthony leaned forward, his voice low. "That's why I need someone on the inside. Someone I can trust. I can't do this alone. I need to know what the police are doing, or not doing, about this." Daniel hesitated, his loyalty to his job conflicting with his respect for Anthony. "If I help you, and they find out, they won't. I'll make sure of it, but I need your eyes and ears. If Coleman's pulling strings, we need to know who's involved. And when it's time to expose this, we need to make sure it sticks." Daniel nodded slowly. "I'll see what I can find. But be careful, Anthony. These people, if they feel threatened, they won't hesitate to protect their own, even if it means burying you." Back at home, Maya was cautiously optimistic. The day had passed without incident, a rarity since Zachary had marked her as his target. She didn't know if it was her father's presence or something else, but the air felt different. For the first time, she felt a glimmer of safety, but Anthony knew better than to think the storm had passed. That evening, as he sifted through the first recordings from the school, he found something that confirmed his suspicions. Vice Principal Daniel's voice, low and conspiratorial, speaking to someone on the phone. "Look, Mr. Coleman, we've done everything we can to keep her quiet. The girl's father showing up complicates things. If he keeps pushing, we'll have to escalate. Yes, yes, I understand. I'll handle it." Anthony played the clip for Rebecca, his jaw clenched. They're planning to discredit Maya. Probably find a way to accuse her of causing trouble, make her look like the problem. Rebecca's face paled. "How do we fight that?" Anthony's eyes were cold. "We expose it before they can act. We need to get this recording into the right hands, someone outside their influence, someone who can make it public." The next morning, Anthony met with Daniel again, sharing the recording. The officer's face darkened as he listened. "That's enough to start an internal inquiry. But if Daniels feels the heat, he'll destroy any other evidence before we can get to it." Anthony nodded. "Then we need to hit them where they don't expect. were going to use their own arrogance against them. Together, they devised a plan. They would let Daniels think he had the upper hand, while secretly gathering more evidence. Daniel agreed to feed false information to the administration, making them believe Anthony was planning to go to the media directly. That would make them panic and, hopefully, become careless. As the trap was set, Anthony knew that the key to victory was patience. He had to wait for the right moment, when Daniels and Coleman felt secure enough to let their guard down. In the meantime, he continued to collect stories from other students who had been targeted by Zachary and his friends. The pattern was clear. Anyone who didn't fit the mold, who dared to challenge the established hierarchy, became a target. Maya, with newfound courage, began to quietly encourage others to share their experiences. With Dexter's help, they set up a secure website where students could anonymously report incidents. The stories flooded in, accounts of bullying, vandalism, even threats. The scope of the corruption was staggering. One evening, after a particularly long day, Anthony sat on the fire escape, looking out over the city. Maya joined him, sitting quietly beside him. "Dad," she whispered, "why do people like Zachary think they're better than everyone else?" Anthony considered the question. Because they've never been told otherwise. When people grow up being treated like they're untouchable, they start to believe it. It's not about strength, it's about never being challenged. Maya looked down at her hands. "I want to fight back, but I'm scared." Anthony put his arm around her shoulders. Bravery isn't about not being scared. It's about standing up despite the fear. You're not alone in this, Maya. We're gonna fix it. Together, Maya nodded, her resolve strengthening. She knew that the battle wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everyone who had ever been silenced. The chaos that had taken hold of St. Augustine Academy over the past few weeks was slowly unraveling, like a tight knot being carefully loosened, thread by thread. For the first time, it seemed like the truth was breaking through the long-standing walls of privilege and corruption. Maya could feel the change in the air, but it wasn't just relief she felt. It was something deeper, an uncertain, cautious hope that maybe, just maybe, things would be different from now on. After the recordings of Vice Principal Daniels and the mayor's involvement went public, the entire community seemed to wake up from a long collective denial. The stories on social media, the anonymous testimonies from students, and the damning audio clips had sparked an outrage that could no longer be silenced. News outlets picked up the story, exposing how the school administration had consistently protected Zachary Coleman and his friends while silencing the victims. The public backlash was swift and unforgiving. Daniels was placed on immediate administrative leave pending a full investigation, and the school board met in emergency sessions to address the scandal. For too long, the town had been under the mayor's shadow, and now the very system that upheld his power was crumbling. Maya was still trying to process it all. The fear she had carried for so long was starting to ease, but it wasn't gone entirely. She knew that just because the truth was out didn't mean the fight was over. There was still so much to do. People to protect, policies to change, and trust to rebuild. Anthony kept a vigilant eye on everything, watching how the town responded to the revelations. He knew from experience that public outcry could be powerful but fleeting. If they didn't act while emotions were high, the system would simply rebuild itself, hiding its flaws under a new layer of deception. He couldn't let that happen. This was his chance to make things right, for Maya and for every other student who had been wronged. One afternoon, while Maya was working on a homework assignment at the kitchen table, Rebecca placed a newspaper in front of her. The headline read, "Corruption Exposed at St. Augustine Academy. Mayor Coleman and school officials under fire." Maya glanced at it, feeling a mix of satisfaction and apprehension. "They're finally seeing it," Rebecca murmured, her tone equal parts relief and worry. "But you know this won't be easy, right? Just because they know doesn't mean they'll change overnight." Maya nodded. "I know. I just want it to stop." I just want to feel safe at school again." Anthony joined them, his expression thoughtful. "It's not enough to expose the problem. We need to make sure it doesn't happen again. We have to push for real change, not just at the school, but in the community." Over the next few days, Anthony and Rebecca worked with a group of concerned parents to draft a formal complaint to the school board, demanding the immediate suspension of all staff involved in the cover-up. They also requested the establishment of an independent oversight committee to ensure that future complaints wouldn't be swept under the rug. Maya and Dexter took the fight online, organizing a digital petition that called for policy reforms and accountability. Their goal wasn't just to remove the corrupt officials, but to create a safe environment for every student. The response was overwhelming. Students who had once been silent, too afraid to speak out, began sharing their own stories. The petition gained thousands of signatures within days, attracting the attention of state education officials. At the next school board meeting, the auditorium was packed. Parents, students, and community members filled the seats, buzzing with tension. The board members looked nervous, clearly aware that the usual empty promises wouldn't placate the crowd this time. Maya sat in the front row with her parents, her hands trembling despite Anthony's calming presence beside her. The first speaker was a mother whose son had been expelled last year for defending himself against one of Zachary's friends. Her voice cracked as she recounted how the school labeled her boy a troublemaker while the real bully faced no consequences. One by one, other parents followed, detailing how their children had been targeted, belittled, or ignored. The stories were heartbreaking, and Maya couldn't help but feel the weight of their collective pain. When it was Anthony's turn to speak, he rose with quiet authority, his presence commanding the room. He didn't raise his voice, but his words cut through the tension like a blade. "I served this country for many years," he began, his gaze sweeping over the board members. "I fought in places where power was abused and justice was a distant dream. I never thought I'd come home to find my own daughter facing the same kind of oppression, right here, where she should feel safe." He paused, letting the words sink in. This isn't just about one boy or one administrator. This is about a culture that allowed someone like Zachary Coleman to believe he could hurt others without consequence. That culture was built on fear, privilege, and silence. It ends today. We're not just demanding punishment. We're demanding a fundamental change, a commitment to protect every student, not just the ones with connections. The crowd erupted into applause, and the board members shifted uncomfortably. They knew they couldn't ignore the call for action anymore. Under pressure, the board announced the immediate suspension of Vice Principal Daniels and promised a thorough investigation into administrative misconduct. They also agreed to implement an independent review process for all future complaints. After the meeting, Maya felt a weight lift from her shoulders. It wasn't over, but it was a start. As they walked back to their car, Anthony wrapped an arm around her. "You did good, kid," he said softly. She looked up at him, her eyes bright. "We did good." The following weeks brought more changes. The school appointed an interim principal, one with no prior ties to the Coleman family, and a task force was created to review past disciplinary actions. Several teachers who had turned a blind eye to bullying were quietly reassigned. Zachary, facing mounting evidence of his actions and losing the protection of his father's influence, was expelled from St. Augustine. The news spread quickly, and Maya couldn't help but feel a bittersweet sense of justice. She didn't take joy in his downfall, only relief that he could no longer hurt anyone else. As the community began to heal, Maya found herself slowly regaining her confidence. The halls of the school felt less suffocating, and familiar faces greeted her with cautious kindness. Some of the students who had once laughed along with Zachary now offered quiet apologies. Maya didn't fully trust their remorse, but she accepted it. understanding that they, too, had been shaped by fear and pressure. Anthony remained vigilant, always watching for signs that the old patterns might resurface. But he also knew that he couldn't stay on high alert forever. One evening, as they sat on the fire escape, he shared his thoughts with Maya. "I'm proud of you," he said, "for standing up, for not letting them break you." Maya looked at him, her expression thoughtful. "I couldn't have done it without you, but what happens now, when the news dies down and people forget?" Anthony squeezed her shoulder gently. "We keep reminding them. Change doesn't happen all at once. It's like planting a seed. You have to keep tending to it. You've already made a difference. Now you have to keep pushing forward." Rebecca joined them, leaning against the railing with a small smile. "We're not going anywhere, Maya. We'll keep fighting for what's right, together." As the sun dipped below the skyline, painting the city in hues of gold and purple, Maya felt something she hadn't in a long time: hope. Her family was finally whole, the shadows of the past giving way to a brighter future. The battle had left scars, but they were healing, woven into the fabric of a story that was no longer about loss, but about resilience and the courage to rebuild. The weeks following the school board meeting were a whirlwind of change, anger, and reconciliation. St. Augustine Academy had been a prestigious institution for generations, but the scandal had rocked it to its core. In the hallways, students whispered about what had happened, some still in disbelief that Zachary Coleman, the untouchable, the golden boy, had finally faced consequences. But change did not come without resistance. There were families who had long benefited from the power dynamics that Zachary and his father upheld, parents who had always found comfort in knowing their children could get away with almost anything if they stayed close to the Colemans. These families now found themselves in shock as the reality sank in that the rules had changed. One evening, Maya was walking home from school when she saw a familiar face approaching. It was Emma Walsh, one of Zachary's former friends. Emma had been one of the quieter members of Zachary's circle, never openly hostile, but never stopping the bullying either. Maya's instinct was to avoid her, but Emma quickened her pace, catching up. "Hey, Maya," Emma began, her voice unsure. "Can we talk?" Maya glanced at her, wary. "About what?" Emma looked down, her hands fidgeting. "About everything. I didn't know Zachary would go that far. I mean, I knew he could be a jerk, but I never thought he'd actually hurt someone like that." Maya kept walking, forcing herself to stay calm. "You didn't think? Or you didn't care?" Emma hesitated, guilt etched on her face. "Maybe both. I didn't want to be on his bad side. You know how it is. If you're not with him, you're against him. I didn't have the guts to stand up for anyone. And I'm sorry. I know that doesn't make it right." Maya stopped and looked at Emma, her expression softening just a little. "It doesn't. But at least you're saying it now. Some people never will." Emma bit her lip. "I guess I just wanted you to know that I'm glad things are changing. And if you ever want to talk, I'm here." Maya didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to lash out, to remind Emma that silence was just as harmful as outright cruelty. But another part of her recognized that people could change. Maybe Emma's regret was genuine. "I'll think about it," Maya replied, her voice neither harsh nor forgiving. That night, at home, Maya shared the encounter with her parents. Anthony nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes it's easier to follow than to stand against something wrong. Doesn't make it right, but it's human." Rebecca added, "It's hard to know who's really sorry and who's just scared because the tide's turning. Be careful, Maya. People who change under pressure can change back just as easily." Anthony glanced at his daughter. "But if she really wants to make amends, maybe it's a chance to start building something better. Real change isn't just about punishment. It's about finding a way to move forward." As the weeks went on, Maya noticed more of Zachary's former friends distancing themselves from him, as if finally realizing how toxic his influence had been. Some students tried to befriend Maya, perhaps hoping to appear on the right side of history now that the power had shifted. Maya remained cautious, unwilling to trust easily, but she was also wise enough to see that the changes weren't purely superficial. The school itself was undergoing a transformation. The new interim principal, Mrs. Avery, held a series of open forums where students could share their experiences and voice their concerns without fear of retaliation. She established a peer support group, co-led by students and teachers, to address bullying directly and create a space for honest dialogue. One day, Mrs. Avery approached Maya after one of the meetings. "You've been brave through all of this," she said. "I'd like you to consider being part of the Student Advisory Council. Your perspective could really help us make lasting changes." Maya hesitated, unsure if she wanted to put herself back in the spotlight, but then she thought about how far they had come, how many students were still too afraid to speak up. She nodded slowly. "I'll do it, if it helps make things better." The more Maya engaged with the school community, the more she realized that many students had been living under the same fear, just not as directly as she had. They were scared of being targeted next, of losing their social standing if they challenged the status quo. Maya began to see that for real progress, they couldn't just remove the bullies. They had to dismantle the culture that allowed them to thrive. One day after school, Maya sat on the bleachers overlooking the soccer field, watching a group of students practice. Anthony joined her, carrying 2 bottles of water. They sat in comfortable silence for a while before Maya spoke. "Do you think people can really change?" she asked. Anthony looked thoughtful. "Some can. Some just pretend to. The trick is knowing the difference." Maya sighed. "It's hard to know who to trust." "It is. But you've got good instincts. You don't have to trust blindly. Let people prove themselves. And remember, change doesn't happen just because people get caught. It happens when they decide to be better." Maya took a deep breath, watching the sun dip behind the trees. She was starting to see that redemption wasn't just about being forgiven, it was about earning back trust, step by step. At the next advisory meeting, Maya brought up the idea of restorative justice, not just punishing the bullies, but giving them a chance to understand the impact of their actions and make amends. It was a controversial suggestion, and some students pushed back, still too angry to consider reconciliation. But Maya made it clear that holding grudges wouldn't help anyone heal. Mrs. Avery supported the idea, and slowly, more students began to see the value in it. They organized workshops where those who had been involved in bullying had to listen to the stories of those they hurt. The first session was tense, with many too ashamed to meet the eyes of their victims. But Maya's presence kept the process grounded. She wasn't there to humiliate anyone, just to make them understand. Over time, as more people opened up, Maya saw something unexpected. Zachary's friends began to genuinely apologize, not because they were forced to, but because they finally understood the harm they had caused. It wasn't perfect, and not everyone participated, but it was a start. Anthony watched his daughter with a quiet pride. She had taken the pain inflicted on her and turned it into something meaningful, something that could outlast the scandal. Rebecca knew that Maya's courage came from both her father's fierce protection and her own resilient spirit. As the community continued to heal, Maya knew that this was only the beginning. There was still much to do, but for the first time in a long while, she felt like they were moving forward. Spring in St. Augustine brought with it a sense of renewal. The air felt fresher, the sky more open, and the sounds of students laughing and talking at St. Augustine Academy carried a note of relief. It was as if the whole school was breathing easier after the long, suffocating tension of the past year. The scandal had shaken the community, but the aftermath was where the real transformation was taking root. The school's new administration, led by Principal Avery, had implemented sweeping reforms. Gone were the days when complaints vanished into locked filing cabinets, or when certain students seemed invincible just because of their family connections. A new reporting system was introduced, one that allowed students to anonymously voice their concerns and report bullying without fear of retaliation. Trained counselors were stationed on site, and peer support groups became a regular part of the curriculum. Maya played an active role in these changes. As a member of the newly formed Student Advisory Council, she worked tirelessly to bridge the gap between students and staff. It wasn't always easy. Some students still harbored resentment or were too fearful to come forward, but Maya knew that the most important battles were often the quiet, persistent ones. One day after class, Maya found herself cornered by Zachary's former best friend, Tyler. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "Hey, Maya," he began, not meeting her eyes. "Can I talk to you for a second?" She crossed her arms, unsure of his intentions. "What is it?" Tyler hesitated, his voice dropping. I, I just wanted to say sorry. I knew what Zachary was doing to you, to a lot of people. I didn't stand up to him because I was too afraid of being the next target. I thought sticking close to him would keep me safe. Turns out, it just made me a coward. Maya considered his words, reading the genuine remorse in his expression. Part of her wanted to lash out, to demand why he hadn't done something sooner. But the other part of her, the part that had learned from her father and from her own experiences, knew that anger wouldn't fix anything. "Why are you telling me this now?" she asked cautiously. "Because seeing you keep fighting even after everything, they broke you down, but you didn't give up. That made me realize how wrong I was. I just wanted to let you know that I'm done with people like Zachary. I'm trying to do better." Maya softened, giving him a small nod. "It's not easy admitting you were wrong. Just make sure you follow through. People will judge you by your actions, not your words." Tyler gave a slight smile, grateful for even a sliver of forgiveness. As he walked away, Maya couldn't help but think of how change sometimes came from the most unexpected places. At home, Maya shared the encounter with her parents. Anthony, who had spent the afternoon installing new locks on the windows, just in case, listened carefully. Rebecca watched him, half expecting him to advise caution or skepticism. But Anthony surprised them both by saying, "People can change. It doesn't mean we forget what they did, but it doesn't mean we can't give them a chance to prove themselves either." Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "That's a pretty generous take coming from you." Anthony shrugged. "I've been given second chances. Doesn't mean I trust easily, but if a person is willing to own up and do better, that counts for something." Maya absorbed her father's words, recognizing that forgiveness didn't mean letting go of caution. It just meant allowing space for growth. In the weeks that followed, Maya continued to notice a shift at school. Students were more open during the advisory council meetings, and some of the former bullies had even started participating, not out of guilt, but because they were genuinely trying to change. The school wasn't perfect. There were still clashes, still tension, but it was undeniably better than it had been. One afternoon, Principal Avery called Maya into her office. Maya's heart raced, wondering if she'd done something wrong. But Avery greeted her with a warm smile. "I wanted to talk to you about something exciting," she said, sliding a letter across the desk. "This came for you today." Maya took the envelope with trembling hands, recognizing the seal of the University of California, Berkeley. She opened it slowly, her heart pounding as she scanned the first line. "Congratulations!" Her eyes widened, and she looked up at Avery, who was grinning. "Full scholarship," Maya whispered, hardly daring to believe it. "That's right," Avery said. "Your work here, your resilience, and your leadership. It didn't go unnoticed. Berkeley's excited to have you." Tears pricked Maya's eyes. It wasn't just about getting into a good school. It was about proving that her future wasn't defined by what she'd endured. She could forge her own path, one shaped by strength, not fear. When Maya shared the news at home, Anthony pulled her into a tight embrace, his pride evident. Rebecca wiped her eyes, laughing through her tears. "I knew you could do it," Anthony said softly. "You never stopped fighting, not just for yourself, but for everyone else too." As Maya prepared for graduation, the school hosted a ceremony to honor the students who had made a difference. Maya was invited to give a speech, and as she stood at the podium, looking out at the gathered faces, both familiar and new, she felt a wave of emotion wash over her. "When I first came to St. Augustine," Maya began, "I thought that fitting in meant staying silent. I thought that to survive I had to be invisible. But I was wrong. Real strength doesn't come from blending in. It comes from standing up. It comes from refusing to be silent in the face of injustice. I wasn't alone in this fight. I had my family, my friends, and even people who once stood on the other side now standing with me. Change doesn't happen because of one person. It happens when we decide together that enough is enough." Her words were met with applause, and as Maya stepped down, she knew that her time at St. Augustine would always be part of her story, not because of the pain, but because of the victory. That evening, as the family gathered on their small balcony, Maya looked out at the city with a sense of peace. Anthony handed her a small, wrapped gift. Inside was a simple locket with a small inscription, "Strength through unity." Maya smiled, knowing that whatever lay ahead, she would face it with courage, just as her father had taught her. Anthony, sitting beside Rebecca, finally allowed himself to believe that the darkness of his past had given way to a brighter, more hopeful future. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, the Johnson family knew that they had not just survived, they had transformed. Together, they had broken the cycle, choosing to rebuild not only their own lives but the community around them. This wasn't just the end of a battle, it was the beginning of something new, a future built on truth, resilience, and the unwavering belief that justice was worth fighting for. The story of Anthony, Maya, and the town of St. Augustine is not just a tale of a father and daughter overcoming bullying. It is a profound exploration of resilience, justice, and the power of standing up against deep-rooted corruption. Through their struggles, the Johnson family teaches us that courage is not merely the absence of fear, but the willingness to confront it despite the odds. From the very beginning, Maya was an outsider at St. Augustine Academy, not just because of her background, but because of a system that had long been designed to protect the privileged. The Coleman family, with their wealth and influence, had ruled the social hierarchy of the school for years, and Zachary Coleman epitomized the arrogance that comes with never facing real consequences. To Maya, attending St. Augustine was supposed to be an opportunity, a chance to prove her academic merit. Yet it quickly became a battlefield where her dignity and safety were constantly under attack. When Anthony returned to Maya's life, it wasn't just as a father, but as a protector, a man hardened by war but softened by the realization that his daughter needed him. He didn't just teach Maya how to fight back physically, he showed her how to be strategic, to gather evidence, and to understand that dismantling a system of power requires more than brute force. It requires precision, patience, and the ability to leverage truth in a way that cannot be ignored. One of the most compelling aspects of Anthony's journey is his transformation from a lone warrior to a father who learns to fight alongside his daughter. His instincts, honed by years of combat, initially drove him to protect Maya by any means necessary. But as he saw Maya's determination to confront the system, not just the individuals within it, Anthony began to understand that sometimes the best way to protect someone is to empower them. His military background gave him skills to fight battles, but Maya taught him how to fight with integrity and for the long term. Maya, on the other hand, grew from a scared, isolated girl into a young leader who inspired others to break their silence. It would have been easier for her to retreat, to let Zachary and his gang continue their reign of terror while she quietly endured. But Maya's resilience was born not just from her father's return, but from a personal realization that her silence only gave power to her oppressors. Instead of shrinking under pressure, she used it to fuel her desire to create lasting change. One of the most moving elements of this story is how Maya learned to differentiate between genuine remorse and performative guilt. Throughout the aftermath of Zachary's fall from power, she encountered people like Emma and Tyler who wanted to make amends. Initially, Maya felt justified in dismissing their apologies. After all, where were they when she was suffering? But her father's perspective, grounded in his own experiences of redemption, taught her that while it's essential to hold people accountable, it's equally important to give them a chance to prove they can be better. The turning point came when Maya decided not just to fight for herself, but to advocate for others who had been silenced. She knew that removing Zachary wasn't enough. The culture that allowed someone like him to flourish had to change. The peer support groups, the advisory council, and the restorative justice sessions were all steps toward healing, not just punishing. Maya's decision to focus on systemic change rather than individual retribution highlighted her growth and maturity. The community's transformation was equally significant. At first, many parents and students resisted the idea that their prestigious academy could be complicit in such blatant corruption. But as the evidence mounted and more victims came forward, people began to see that justice was not about maintaining appearances, but about making sure that everyone, regardless of background, was treated with respect and fairness. Principal Avery's leadership played a crucial role in this transformation. Unlike her predecessors, she didn't just offer platitudes. She actively listened to students and acknowledged past failures. By involving students like Maya directly in the reform process, she made it clear that the school belonged to everyone, not just those with power and connections. Anthony's growth also mirrored the town's journey. He learned that while physical protection is crucial, safeguarding someone's spirit and dignity is just as important. Letting Maya take the lead in the later stages of their fight was his way of acknowledging her strength, not just as his daughter, but as an individual who had the right to shape her own future. In the end, Zachary's downfall was not just a victory for Maya, but for the entire community. When the truth came to light, it forced people to reevaluate what they valued: reputation versus integrity, power versus justice. The town of St. Augustine had been sleepwalking through years of systemic abuse, but Maya and Anthony's relentless pursuit of truth forced them to confront their complacency. The story of Maya and Anthony Johnson is a powerful reminder that change is possible, but it requires more than anger. It demands accountability, empathy, and a willingness to break the cycle of silence. Their fight was never just about personal justice, but about creating a safer environment for those who came after them. The lesson. The lesson we take from this story is that standing up to injustice requires both courage and strategy. It's not enough to point out the problem. We must also be willing to build better systems that protect the vulnerable. Real change happens when we refuse to be complicit in wrongdoing, even when it would be easier to stay silent. Maya's journey shows us that we are stronger than the fear that tries to paralyze us. Whether at school, work, or in our communities, we have the power to challenge unfair systems. The key is to remain steadfast, even when others doubt us, and to build alliances with those who share our values. Anthony's role as a father and a protector demonstrates that true strength is not about domination, but about nurturing resilience. Sometimes protecting someone means giving them the tools to protect themselves. Maya learned to fight, not just with her fists, but with her voice and her integrity. In our own lives, we can apply these lessons by advocating for fairness wherever we see inequality. Whether it's speaking up for someone being mistreated or challenging policies that harm others, our actions matter. We must remember that silence only serves the oppressor. while courage, even in small acts, can inspire others to take a stand. If you were moved by this story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us continue sharing powerful stories like Maya and Anthony's, stories that remind us of the human spirit's incredible capacity for resilience and change. Don't forget to like, share, and leave a comment about how this story inspired you. Stay tuned for more stories of everyday heroes who refuse to back down in the face of adversity.